It started as just another case, but something felt off. And Elon Musk wasn't the only one who noticed. The courtroom was cold, not in temperature but in atmosphere, the kind of cold that seeped through polished wooden benches filled with men in suits murmuring in hushed tones. The kind of cold that came from knowing the outcome of a trial had already been decided long before the first gavel strike. At the defendant's table, Elon Musk sat still, fingers drumming lightly against the polished wood. His expression gave nothing away, but his mind was working. Across from him, the prosecution's table exuded a quiet confidence. Too much confidence. Daniel Forsyth, the lead prosecutor, leaned back in his chair, hands steepled like a man who already knew he had won. And presiding over it all was Judge Bernard Langford. His face was neutral, almost unreadable, but something about his stillness was unnatural, too controlled, too precise. Then came the first red flag. "Objection, Your Honor!" Musk's attorney, Russell Greer, spoke firmly. "The prosecution is making baseless claims with no supporting evidence." Langford barely looked up. "Overruled." Greer hesitated just for a second, but that second said everything. The judge had let an unsubstantiated accusation slide as if it were nothing. Musk leaned in slightly, his voice low. "That's a stretch, don't you think?" Greer didn't answer. He was too busy processing what had just happened. Then came the second red flag. "Your Honor," Greer continued, his voice measured, "we request permission to introduce key documents outlining inconsistencies in the plaintiff's claims." Langford sighed. A small, deliberate pause, as if he were entertaining an inconvenience. Then, denied. Greer straightened his tie, subtle, controlled. But Musk noticed. Every ruling so far had gone against them, every single one. And the prosecution, their case, which should have been riddled with holes, was suddenly airtight. Not because it was strong, because they were being allowed to say whatever they wanted. Across the room, Forsyth smirked, tapping his pen against the desk, glancing at Musk for just a second too long. Musk crossed his arms, studying the judge. Langford was composed, neutral, too neutral. Something was wrong. And Musk wasn't the only one who felt it. Not all heroes wear suits. Some carry notebooks. And one journalist was about to uncover a secret too dangerous to ignore. Caroline Levitt didn't trust perfect stories. She had spent her career uncovering power plays, backdoor deals, and corruption that never made it to the front pages. And this case stank. She had been watching from the beginning, tuning into the live coverage like the rest of the world. But unlike the casual viewers, she didn't see a legal battle. She saw a performance. One side was allowed to make any claim they wanted. The other was shut down before they could even speak. That wasn't just bad lawyering. That was interference. Caroline's fingers tapped against the keyboard of her laptop, pulling up every public record on Judge Bernard Langford. He was clean, too clean, a respected federal judge, no history of misconduct, no controversial rulings, the kind of record that doesn't exist in real life. A squeaky clean past usually meant someone had scrubbed it. So she started digging deeper. Financial records, political donations, past corporate connections, nothing until she found it. A small, quiet trust fund under Langford's name. The kind of thing that shouldn't have been public, buried beneath layers of legal jargon and offshore accounts. At first, the deposit seemed normal. A few transactions here and there, all within the usual limits, but then a series of massive deposits, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the timing? The first major deposit landed just weeks before Langford was assigned to Musk's case. Caroline's heart pounded. This wasn't coincidence. She had just found the crack in the foundation, and now she had to tear the whole thing open. Money leaves a trail, and when you follow that trail, It always leads to someone who doesn't want to be found. Caroline Levitt had seen corruption before, but this was something different. She wasn't looking at a simple bribe. She was staring at a system. A network designed to keep powerful people above the law, and it all led back to Judge Bernard Langford. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the evidence she had gathered so far. Anonymous deposits, a hidden trust fund, suspicious timing. But a gut feeling told her there was more. So she kept digging. Late that night, as she cross-referenced Langford's transactions with corporate movements, she found something even worse. Langford had taken a 3-day trip to Mexico. Nothing odd about a vacation, right? Except this wasn't a vacation. Caroline pulled up private flight logs, the kind of records the public wasn't supposed to have access to. The flight? It wasn't booked under Langford's name. It was booked under a private business account. And the passengers? High-ranking executives from Tesla's biggest competitors. Caroline exhaled sharply. This wasn't just bias. Langford wasn't just being influenced. He was on the payroll. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard. She was so close. But she needed more. Something that couldn't be ignored. Something that would make this unavoidable. And then, a new email hit her inbox. The subject line was short. Anonymous tip. She hesitated, then clicked. The message was brief. You're looking in the right place. But if you want the real story, check Langford's travel records from late 2023. He wasn't in Mexico for leisure, and he wasn't alone. Her pulse raced. Langford's trip had been arranged, paid for, and strategically planned. The people who wanted Musk out of the picture had brought the judge straight to them. And if she could prove it, the entire case would collapse. But she had to move fast. Because if she was right, if Langford was really working for someone else, then she wasn't just uncovering a scandal. She was walking straight into a war. Exposing corruption is one thing. Proving it? That's a different battle entirely. Caroline Levitt knew she was on the brink of something massive. The pieces were there, scattered like a jigsaw puzzle. But she needed one final connection. Something that could shatter any chance of Langford talking his way out of this. She couldn't do it alone. So she called Ethan Vaughn. A former Department of Justice analyst, Vaughn had turned whistleblower when he realized the system he served was just as corrupt as the criminals they prosecuted. He had since built a reputation in cybersecurity and digital forensics. If anyone could find what she needed, it was him. When she explained the situation, there was silence on the other end of the line. Then Vaughn's voice came through, low and measured. Caroline, you do realize this isn't just a bad ruling. If Langford's involved in something deeper, you're stepping into dangerous territory. She exhaled sharply. I don't care. Just tell me if you can get something. A pause. Then, give me 24 hours. But Caroline barely had 12. The trial was moving too fast. If Musk's team didn't have something solid by morning, he was going down. Then, just before dawn, her phone screen lit up. Vaughn's message, check your email. It's worse than you think. Caroline opened the file. Inside was a series of leaked emails between Judge Langford and a corporate lobbyist named Philip Grayson, a man with direct ties to the prosecution's lead attorney, Daniel Forsyth. The messages weren't vague, they were direct. One email stood out. The deal is simple. Ensure the rulings favor Forsyth's clients, and you won't have to worry about retirement. The fund will take care of itself. Just make sure Musk's people don't get a single win in that courtroom. Caroline's stomach dropped. This wasn't just bias. This was bribery. And worse, Langford responded. Understood. As long as everything stays off the books, we won't have an issue. Her pulse raced. This wasn't just a bad judge. This was a judge on payroll. But exposing it would require more than just documents. It needed to go public. and it needed to happen now. One story, one broadcast, and the entire legal system would never be the same again. The decision was made before Caroline even closed her laptop. This wasn't something to be published quietly in an article. This had to be seen, heard, believed. Within hours, she arranged for a live television interview. The network knew her reputation. When she called and said she had proof of judicial corruption involving one of the most powerful corporate trials in the country, they gave her a prime-time slot. As she took her seat in the studio, cameras rolling, the anchor asked the first question. "Caroline, you claim to have uncovered something shocking in Elon Musk's trial. What is it?" She didn't hesitate. "This isn't just courtroom bias. This is corruption at the highest level. We have proof that Judge Bernard Langford accepted financial incentives to manipulate the case against Elon Musk. And here's the worst part. He did it in coordination with the prosecution's legal team." She pulled out printed copies of the emails, held them up, read excerpts on air. She outlined the offshore payments, the Mexico retreat, the corporate ties that turned Langford from an impartial judge into a bought man. The reaction was instantaneous. Social media erupted. The hashtag #Langford scandal was trending worldwide within minutes. Politicians demanded investigations. Journalists scrambled to verify the documents. News stations cut into regular programming to report on the revelation. But there was one problem. Back in the courtroom, Musk's legal team still had no idea what was happening. Not yet. But they were about to find out. Imagine being caught red-handed. Imagine the whole world watching. Now, imagine trying to escape. When court resumed the next morning, Judge Langford walked in as if nothing had changed, but something had. A quiet ripple of whispers moved through the courtroom. Attorneys were checking their phones. The gallery was unusually restless, and then Musk's lawyer, Russell Greer, received a message. He glanced at his phone, and his entire expression shifted. Without waiting for permission, he stood up. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I'd like to submit urgent new evidence into the record." Langford barely looked up. "Denied." Greer's lips curled into a slow smile. "The evidence is regarding your financial ties to the prosecution's backers. Are you denying a motion to introduce evidence against yourself?" The courtroom fell silent. Even Daniel Forsyth stiffened in his seat. Langford's jaw tightened. His fingers twitched near the gavel. "I don't know what you're talking about." Greer didn't stop. "We have correspondence between you and Philip Grayson, discussing a coordinated effort to ensure Elon Musk's legal defense was obstructed at every turn." The courtroom erupted. Langford slammed his gavel. "Silence!" Then, the doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. A woman in a navy blazer strode in, a federal investigator. Langford froze. She stepped forward, voice even but firm. "Judge Langford, step down from the bench. You are under federal investigation for judicial misconduct, bribery, and obstruction of justice." Langford's fingers tightened around the gavel. For the first time since the trial started, he looked lost. But the fallout had only just begun. When one piece falls, the whole tower comes crashing down. The moment the federal investigator stepped into the courtroom, the power dynamics shifted. Judge Bernard Langford, the man who had held absolute control over the trial, was no longer in charge. He sat motionless, his fingers twitching near the gavel. His carefully curated facade was beginning to crack. The investigator took another step forward. "Judge Langford, as of this moment, you are relieved of your duties. You are to come with us for questioning." A wave of sharp whispers erupted in the gallery. Reporters exchanged frantic glances, their hands gripping their phones. The entire courtroom had become a spectacle of disbelief. Langford inhaled, then exhaled slowly, clinging to his last shred of authority. He adjusted his glasses, his voice dangerously low. "This is highly irregular. The investigator tilted her head slightly. Not anymore. A ripple of tension spread through the room. Forsyth, the prosecution's lead attorney, suddenly jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, this is completely inappropriate. There is no reason to believe—" The investigator cut him off. "Mr. Forsyth, your name has come up in connection with this case as well. You will also be staying for questioning." His mouth snapped shut. The judge's gaze darted between Forsyth and the investigator. His final safety net had disappeared. Langford clenched his jaw, turning toward the court bailiff, as if searching for an escape route. But the bailiff didn't move. No one did. The weight of the moment was suffocating. Then finally he reached for his gavel. His fingers hovered over it for a fraction of a second before he pulled them back. His voice was barely above a whisper. "This court is now in recess." He didn't bang the gavel. He didn't look at anyone. He just stood up and walked out. The moment he disappeared through the judge's chamber doors, the courtroom exploded into chaos. Attorneys murmured in frantic clusters. Spectators grabbed their phones. Journalists sprinted from the gallery, ready to break the story before anyone else. And in the middle of it all, Elon Musk remained seated, watching it unfold like a man who had seen it coming all along. His attorney, Russell Greer, let out a sharp breath. "We just witnessed a sitting judge abandon his own bench in the middle of a trial." Musk raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, that doesn't happen often." But the fallout was just beginning. The truth is out, but the fight isn't over. The headlines hit within minutes. Judge caught in bribery scandal. Corporate ties exposed. FBI opens investigation into the Musk trial corruption. For the first time in decades, the entire judicial system was under scrutiny. Langford went silent. He refused to speak to reporters. He hired a legal team of his own. The man who once delivered verdicts now found himself in the crosshairs of the Department of Justice. Forsyth, on the other hand, tried to save himself. He issued a public statement insisting he had no direct involvement in the bribery scheme. No one believed him, because then Caroline Levitt dropped another bombshell. This time, it wasn't just about Langford. It was about an entire web of judicial corruption. Langford wasn't the only judge on the payroll. Forsyth wasn't just a lawyer, he was a fixer, a man whose career had been built on bending the law in favor of corporate power. The justice system wasn't just flawed, it had been rigged for years. The public erupted in outrage. Protests broke out. Politicians were forced to take a stance. The Department of Justice announced a full-scale investigation into judicial misconduct, one of the largest in modern history. And Musk? Musk walked away from the case, completely free. The lawsuit collapsed, along with the credibility of everyone involved. His reputation, already built on defying powerful interests, only grew stronger. And in a rare moment, he publicly acknowledged the person responsible for exposing it all. "This wasn't just about me," Musk said in an interview. "This was about something bigger. The people who rigged the system assume no one will ever fight back. Caroline proved them wrong." Levitt's article went global. The truth was out, and there was no putting it back in the box. But she knew one thing. This fight wasn't over. Because corruption doesn't die in a day. It thrives in the dark. It depends on silence, on fear, on people looking the other way. But when you shine a light on it, when you refuse to back down, it crumbles. The truth isn't always convenient. It's not always easy, but it's always worth fighting for. Powerful people count on you looking the other way. The only question is, will you? Corruption exists because people allow it. If people stop questioning authority, nothing changes. If you believe in exposing corruption, share this story, subscribe for more, and remember, never stop asking questions.